So what's going on, everybody? I know normally when we do these types of shows, like you've seen the great Jorge Martin, like up here talking with folks, and you've seen other people as well that are part of the cookout, whether it's been Troy King, Laquan Jones, interviewing like some of the other people that have been a part of the cookout. Marcus Grant has been up here talking with Tara. I mean, so many other people have had a chance to have their voices heard as a part of the group, but I had to step in. I wanted to sit down and talk with one of my uh, former colleagues, like over at Yahoo Sports. Now, Tank Williams, brother, what's going on, man? I appreciate you taking the time, and I know we got one day before the draft, but how you doing,
Yeah,
man?
all good. As you know, it's busy times right now with the draft upcoming, but definitely appreciating that it's still the off season. So I've been taking a lot of time to spend with the family and doing other things that I really don't have time to focus on during football season. But I would say overall things are good.
Yeah, that's the important thing, and I try to remind myself about that as soon as like pretty much after the Super Bowl ends, right? It's like I just want to get away. Like I don't
Mhm.
want to look at social media. I don't want to look at any stats. I don't want to look at any more articles no more. I just want to be, for the next couple of months. And then now with the NFL finding a way to be in our lives almost every day, it feels like it's
Mhm.
been for like almost after the Super Bowl, it was like there was already combine discussions, right? And then after the combine leads right into the draft. But hopefully after Thursday night, or actually, especially after this weekend, we'll have a little bit of a vacation until training camp and all that starts to pick up again. But one of the reasons why I wanted you on in order to chop it up for a little bit, is because you have that perspective. I mean, of course, folks, if they don't know, I mean, they can find most of your work over at Yahoo Fantasy Sports as of right now. But beforehand, I mean, you were in the league, right? I mean, you played on the defensive side, safety, and you were a part of the draft. You were part of this entire process and the spectacle that we see in front of us. So, I guess to get your perspective on it real quick, I mean, how was it for you back in the class of 2002? Like, how was that draft process for you leading up to what, for at least for most of us, what's going to be like tomorrow night, that first round, and like all of the proceedings that happened like before and afterwards?
Yeah, well, I can speak to it from a couple different perspectives. I mean, for me personally, I ended up being drafted in the second round, 45th pick overall to the Tennessee Titans. And I can honestly say that I had no clue where I was going to get drafted. I think there's still some guys to this day that fall in that category. Obviously, the guys at the top of the draft, they know where they're going to go for the most part, but you also have guys that'll fall down the draft like Aaron Rodgers has before and things like that. So we know that those occurrences can happen. But for me personally, the draft experience was amazing. I went to the Senior Bowl and had opportunity to kind of highlight my skills there, where I feel like I wasn't a prominent athlete going into the bowl, but I felt like I made some noise there that's showing that I was a larger guy that was able to cover guys and move better than people anticipated for a guy my size. And then I went to the combine and ran like a 4.3 on the stopwatch. And so when you see a big guy that can move like that, you also kind of move up some draft charts. And so then you get to the draft, and I felt like I think my agent told me I could go anywhere between the second and the fifth round. And then I ended up getting drafted, 45th overall, and having that experience with my family and my friends all around, that was pretty amazing. But when you look at it from the kind of club and media perspective based on what we do, I mean, as you know, like even at the combine, it's a bunch of smoke and mirrors. So the Tennessee Titans drafted me. I went to a bunch of meetings with the high execs and coaches and things like that while I was at the combine. The Tennessee Titans sent one of their guys who met me on my way to lunch. And we chatted for like 10, 15 minutes, just like real casual. Like, so I didn't think anything of that conversation until they drafted me in the second round. And so that's the thing to say, that a lot of times we'll hear a lot of noise about some of these athletes saying that they don't have a great work ethic or a team may not be interested in them. And to me, whenever I hear things like that, I mean, we always know. We were just talking about it before we hopped on and started actually recording, that you hear a lot of smoke in the
Mm-hmm.
media once you get close to the draft. But then also there's a lot of smoke and games being played even as far back as the combine, because teams know what needs they need early on and they try to cover up their hand as best as possible. And so that's why a lot of times I try to look at tape and get my general impression on guys and what team needs are. And then I ignore a lot of stuff that I see on social media and everything else. And so in some instances that may hurt me, but I feel like I don't want to be persuaded too much by a lot of the garbage and noise that's out there. And if my take is wrong, then it'll be wrong. But I like to do my own due diligence and then just kind of leaning on some of the truths that I feel I found in the tape and things that I've observed, and then just kind of lean on that and let that be my guide.
Right. And I would say that, I mean, as we were talking before the show, it seems like the draft and all just the spectacle of it all has changed in the last, at least in my time of really paying attention to the NFL and watching prospects go from college to the pros. I, what's, I guess, in your words, what are some of like the biggest changes you've noticed like in the entire draft process, like over the years? Because I know that you said like some of the things have stayed the same, but have you noticed any major differences in how the draft is kind of shaking out over the last, like, let's say even like 3 to 5 years?
I mean, it seems like you said, I mean, now the NFL is 24/7. Like there's no way to escape it. And so this event is one of the largest events for the NFL that's not during the regular season. And so there's so much time and energy placed around this. And I think the most important thing is how much control I feel the players have now. Because you see a lot of these guys have been followed since they were in high school, college, and so they have these huge social media followers. And I felt like back in my day, we were pretty much at the mercy of the NFL, and like basically they had this big weight that they can just kind of hold over you as far as like whether it's OTAs or attending the draft or pressuring you to do X, Y, Z. But I feel like now a lot of these players who have been in this position where they've had all this exposure from early on and like they have a lot more control when it comes to the draft process and choosing not to do some of the things that we felt it was necessary to do. Like guys, almost everyone competed at the combine because you feel like that's something that you had to do. It may hurt your draft status. So you find more guys these days limited some of the stuff that they're doing in the off season and taking more control and saying like they're going to rely on their tape and what they've done in college between those white lines and not really exposing themselves to some of the harms that they can endure during the draft process. And I think that's something that I'm hoping will continue to go as guys notice that they can not compete at the combine and not do some of these things that the NFL used to force you to do and still get drafted and have successful careers.
And now you don't have to name names or anything like that. I'm gonna put you on the spot real quick. Like, have you been that mentor for some of the prospects that have come through in the last, since you've gotten out? Like, have you been able to talk with some of them prospects in order to, I guess, prepare them? I mean, to even give them a sense of what life is going to be like once they get from their current spot, like in college, to where it's going to be like in the NFL. Because I know like mentorship is a large thing, and I've heard that being a big thing in the NFL. But have you had a chance to be a part of that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think not only just for guys who are trying to make it to the NFL, I think one of the things that could be most helpful is when you're talking to guys who are in, uh, high school and just trying to make it to college and trying to determine what college they're going to go through and things like that. I mean, so I feel like once we're in the position that we are, unless you're talking to like some guys who went to your university and they may not be, high draft caliber guys, I
Right.
think you can give some insight to them. But some of the guys that are more prominent, they already have resources available to them. And so they definitely take the nuggets that you provide and use it, but they're getting resources from all these other people and places. But I feel like you can be more impactful when you're helping like some of these younger kids who really don't have anyone to lean on, who may be attending high school and just trying to decide which college to go to and how to determine which college to go to and what fields to major in. I think that that's the most impact that I can have versus someone who's already going to be drafted. It's just a matter of whether they're going to go in
Mm-hmm.
the second or third or fourth, fifth round.
Right, right. And so let's transition outside of your time in the NFL. I mean, after you got out, I mean, now you're looking at, I mean, now you're part of like Yahoo Fantasy Sports. I mean, I spent some
Mhm.
time there, like as a freelancer. But what was that transition like? I mean, you go from an industry that's full of other folks that look like both of us to an industry that doesn't have the same level of representation. So how did that feel making that transition? Did it feel different in terms of being able to turn to your left or your right and not see like other brothers and sisters like there? Or like what was that like making that move?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all go through our own journey, and mine's a little bit unique as well because when I retired from the NFL, I jumped right into corporate America. I started working for a private commercial real estate firm, and I worked with them from 2009 through 2013. Then I got the entrepreneurial itch and started developing properties here in the local area where I live in the Bay Area. And then I went to Vegas for like a fantasy football convention, and I met Brad Evans, who was with Yahoo at the time. and we're just chopping it up about fantasy football. He's like, man, you know your stuff, and you're right in the area where we film. Like, I should let you speak to one of the decision makers and see if we can have you on the show. And so basically, that parlayed into just doing the gig basically for free on that fantasy football live show in 2015. And that went over well. And I've just been doing it ever since. I mean, I know some guys will sign on and become like employees with the company and things like that. Like, honestly, I've been a contractor for Yahoo since 2015, and I just do annual deals. So, from a certain extent, like, it's always this uncertainty about, because there's so much turnover in the industry, whether you're going to continue on with that company or move on to another one. But I've been fortunate to be able to work with a bunch of really great folks in the fantasy space with Yahoo, and at the same time, because I am a contractor, it's also given me an opportunity to work with some other outlets in the industry and kind of broaden my scope. Whereas I was covering NFL, college football, and fantasy for Yahoo. After the pandemic, everything got scaled back a little bit. But then I got into sports betting and things like that, working with some other affiliates. And so, you know how it is. You always just need to grind, stay on top of the space, and the more you can do and kind of branch out and show your worth and your knowledge of the game. And so I find a unique space where I play the game, understand the X's and O's, understand the fantasy aspect of it, and also understand the sports betting aspect of the game. And so just trying to bring all those things to the table and then disseminate it in an entertaining way. And I feel like that's how I try to carve out my niche amongst everyone that's doing a lot of things that we do in the space.
Right. And I guess for the new folks, let's say if I'm a let's say I'm a new content creator and I have no idea how to make it like in this industry. I mean, could you give at least some simple advice, because you touched on a lot of things. I mean, and you hit on a lot of the areas that are of interest to the industry at this point, whether it's sports betting, where it's understanding X's and O's. I mean, all of that stuff that goes into what you do or what you bring to the table. So if you're new and you want to get into this space, I mean, what would you recommend? Like, what would you recommend to a new content creator? How would you help them? I mean, especially if they're a minority, what would you recommend to them in terms of getting started, and how would they go about at least trying to make their way as a new person, like within the industry?
I would say figure out what your niche is, figure out what you're passionate about, and start working on your craft. I mean, I know I've seen a lot of people in the space, some folks in the cookout and in other areas where they find a niche that they want to tackle in the sports entertainment space, and they just start shooting out their content on social media and refining their game, refining their voice. And then at the same time, while you're doing that, I would say just reach out to all the people that are out there, whether it's the Yahoos or the NBCs or the Fantasy Lives and all those guys, and just try to introduce yourself to them and let them know that you're working in the space and that you're looking for an opportunity. I mean, it's one of those things. Even though I've been with Yahoo since 2015, I had like this regular cadence where I reach out to some of the major networks and just check in with some of the decision makers, just see what they're up to, see if they're trying to expand into the fantasy and sports betting space, because it seems like we're starting to see more and more of that on like our nationwide primetime TV networks
Mhm.
now, whereas like I would say 5 years or so ago, I mean, there really wasn't anything to be said about fantasy. Or in the past couple of years, they just have their analysts make sure every quarter they'd be like, oh, I bet your fantasy owners or managers feel good about that play. But then that's the extent of it. Whereas like I feel like there's definitely an audience on national TV where they could appreciate someone who can also talk about the X's and O's, but at the same time get into a little bit more depth of why this makes sense in the sports betting community, or why someone should pay attention to this player or this offense in the fantasy space, and still make it to where that can be digested by your casual football fan. And so I think that's some of the things that we're trying to trend towards. And so just putting those ideas out there into the space and continue to work that message so that we'll continue to see more folks like us working those sidelines and in the booths.
I would 100% agree with that, because obviously, I mean, my 5'9" ass like wasn't out there like playing, professional football like yourself, but I at least tried to find my niche within this space because I have an analytical background. Like I can play with some data and like create visuals and all that. So at least like my niche was being able to do that and actually speak to the statistical aspect of the fantasy football and somewhat to the X's and O's. I'm still trying to learn as much as I possibly can, reading books and whatnot and studying film, and at least trying to study film. I'm no like Ray G or you or anything like that, but at least finding out like what you're passionate about within the space that will at least bring something to the table. I know that's a phrase that you've been using. I'm going to try and do the same, because if you think that that's one of the things that you can do, whether it's, I don't know, grind film, whether it's, you know, pull some data, or, you know, whatever the case may be, or even if it's just talking. I mean, there are a lot of people that at least can, that derive, or at least that can provide some value just by being able to like have a conversation with other people, be able to elicit some of the responses that would be of some use to fantasy people, right? Because if
Mhm.
even if you're just a host, I mean, just like setting up a conversation like we're doing right now, and just being able to ask questions, or it, like, again, creates that conversation, create that environment where if you're talking with somebody that's in the know, then you can get some of those nuggets to be like, well, hey, I was just talking with so and they dropped these nuggets, and that could be of use to some people. So it doesn't always have to be about the content creation doesn't have to be about grinding film, or, you know, being in the spreadsheets or anything like that. It could just be because you have a good way of talking, right? You can like at least have a conversation with somebody else, and they can at least, you know, have that back and forth, or create that back and forth environment, so that other people can at least have that sense of enjoyment when they listen to you, or at least come away learning something about either yourself or the person that you might be talking to. So there are many ways for you to get involved, like in the fantasy community, or just in content creation, like on its own. So don't think that, I mean, while it's always good to have like those skill sets already in place, like if
Mhm.
you're a host of a different show, or you have experience hosting, or you have experience, you know, video editing, or being in conversation, like whatever the case may be, like doesn't have to be direct ties. It could just be anything. But identifying what you're passionate about, I think, is the most important part. Because if you try and, I guess, pigeonhole yourself into some role and say like, well, I'm going to be the next Stephen A. Smith, where I'm just going to like fire off hot takes and like argue with people, and like get involved with these debates or whatever, and people will be able to sniff that out like relatively
Right.
quickly. I mean, that's just not going to work for you. You might be good for a hot minute, but if that's not really you, people will notice that like real quick. And so I would agree with you, Tank. I mean, it's easy. It's easier for me to just stick to what I know. I know I might not be able to grind some film, but hey, if I can get a hold of some data, if I can get, you know, get a chance to actually build a profile of a player, or understand an offense from a schematic or analytical perspective, I can at least understand that, and I can speak to what I know. And
Mhm.
doing that allows you to build that platform, because people start to trust you, because you are able to at least speak on what you know. And building that audience and gaining that trust of people that follow you on Twitter, or like YouTube, or, you know, whatever the platform is going to be, that is where like you can start to understand like where you can forge your path as a content creator. And that doesn't mean you can't branch out, right? I mean, I'm
Mhm.
sure when you started off, I mean, you didn't have like all the chops of being on camera, and having to, you know, meet deadlines of, like, you know, being on camera like on Sundays, and like all this other stuff that Yahoo asks of you. I mean, it takes time to get there, and those are skill sets that you can build. So once you get to that point, I think that's where it becomes easier for folks to say like, oh, okay, well, I know Tank from, you know, his time in the NFL, so I know he knows the X's and O's. But now that he's done all this other stuff, all right, so now I trust him, like when it comes to, you know, like placing bets, or I trust him when it comes to fantasy analysis, because of all these other
Mhm.
things, these like original skill sets that you had. And the same thing for me. I mean, folks might have known me for my weather analysis coming in and like getting started like in the fantasy space, but once you highlight the other things that you can do, and like things that can build off of like whatever your niche space is, or what your niche skill set is, then people start to find like gravitate towards you for other questions and things like that. So I'm with you. But I guess a quick question, like when you first started off, what was, I guess, one of the things that what was your passion coming into fantasy content creation, and what have you grown into being like one of your favorite things to do about fantasy content creation?
Yeah, I would say that initially fantasy was the thing that kind of drew me back into football because when I retired from the game, it was due to a bunch of injuries and my career really didn't end the way I anticipated. So I was a little bit salty with the game.
Hmm.
And so I ended up playing fantasy football with some of my college boys, and then that kind of roped me back in, my love of the game. And then I just happened to meet with Brad in Vegas, like when all those synergies were coming about, and I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of the game. And I would feel that also one of the major factors was while I was in Vegas. I was meeting with a bunch of guys who were winning like the DraftKings tournaments at the time, like the Jonathan Bells and the Peter Jennings and all those guys, Al
Mhm.
Zeidenfeld. And so I had opportunity to go out to dinner with those guys on a couple of occasions and then just really see how they looked at the game from a different perspective and a lot, analytical, a lot of data and things like that. And so that's when I started to pair and merge together like my insight from playing the game along with how they were viewing the game and just trying to form my own way of viewing and trying to project what guys and teams were going to be able to do on an annual basis. And so I found that really unique. And so I think just having that initial love for the game and the passion for fantasy football playing with my boys and then finding this unique opportunity, that's what really kind of spurred everything else and then allowed me the opportunity to just kind of get my foot in the door and then branch off into all these other segments of the game that I was already quite familiar with. And I think one other thing that I wanted to touch on too is one thing that you kind of alluded to when you were speaking before, and that's just the benefit of having a network, a community, because I feel like that's the most important thing. Like whether you're talking about sports entertainment, or you're talking about the tech industry, venture, like I mean, there's so many things, corporate America, where a lot of times the people who get the opportunities is someone that's already in that network. And so I feel if you're someone that's just starting off, another thing you can do is just ping a lot of people on social media who are doing some of the things that you would like to do and just try to pick their brains, build these relationships. Like right now, we have the Cookout, where it's a bunch of folks who do similar things yet at the same time. We have different skill sets, but I think that using that group effect in order to try to knock on some doors and try to secure some opportunities for folks who really haven't had the opportunities that others have had in the space. And I feel like that's really key as well. And that's something that I really applaud you guys for, starting this community that way, because I feel like it should be able to, hopefully, start to gather some movement as we continue to progress through the years and kind of, have larger numbers and start to have more of a presence on the big stage of sports entertainment.
That's exactly it, man. And I'm hoping we get to that point, because when I know, and folks have probably heard like the story beforehand, because when we first started this group, it was about 10, 15 of us just sitting in an empty conference room at the hotel at the Fantasy Football Expo. And but that speaks to your point. I mean, we wouldn't have even started this group had we not all been at this networking event. I mean, the FF Expo, I mean, it's now, at least for my purposes, it is just a fun weekend for me to go up and drink with all the people that we talk to, like on social media, on DM threads and all that. I mean, so I don't really use it as a networking thing anymore. It's just more, an excuse to go drink for an entire
Hmm.
weekend. But originally, that's the reason that we would that folks would come to it, because you get to meet some of the other content creators in the space that you typically wouldn't get a chance to face or anything like that. So it would be easier for us to get together and do something like that, because I mean, shoot, I had the chance to meet like Jason Klobaka, I mean, content manager over at Yahoo, at the Fantasy Football Expo just this past year. I mean, that was part of the reason why I wound up getting the freelance gig over at Yahoo, because we talked through email, but had the face-to-face combo. And then things kind of went they kicked off after that. But when all the fellas that got together at the expo last year, it was just a short, 30-45 minute conversation about minorities in the industry, getting some more information out to each of us so that we can kind of build off of each other, because we had like Ray Garvin in the room, like Troy King in the room, Laquan's in the room. I mean, there's so many of us in the room that have found success within this industry, but trying to make sure that the next group of people coming up behind us, or even just whatever challenges face us in the future, that we weren't able to kind of work together in order to get through whatever troubles might come our way. So, I mean, after that conversation, it was a really productive convo, but it was afterwards, what do we do after that? Right? Do we have to wait an entire year before we're all together in Canton, Ohio, at a random hotel to have this conversation again? No, I mean, it's just but building this group is something that allows us to at least do all this stuff together, provide resources for each other together. And it's again in a way that we can actually communicate with each other. It's just right now it's just a simple Twitter DM thread, but hopefully we can turn it into something that's much more, and again, that would we spark some of those conversations that we typically wouldn't be able to do just out in the open on social media or anything like that. But But I guess question for you, Tank. I mean, when you were, I mean, in your time in the fantasy industry, I mean, has this, I mean, have you? I'm sure you noticed. I mean, the lack of representation. But where do you see things going over the next, let's say, even 2 to 3 years, like regarding representation within the industry? I mean, do you think things are trending in the right direction, or I mean, and with especially in regards to the cookout? I mean, what can we do as a group in order to make things that are a little bit better so that we see more of us like on camera on Yahoo Fantasy Football on Sundays, or whatever the case may be?
I think things are trending in the right direction. I can see some faces and voices with networks and outlets that I wasn't accustomed to seeing, I would say, just a couple of years ago. And I feel like people are making more of an effort to try to diversify the voices that they have providing content these days. That being said, I still feel that we have a long way to go because just like in every other industry, a lot of folks who have the top gigs and it just gets, recycled through to the guys who know that the top decision makers who will probably work together at different outlets because a lot of the major folks, they just kind of switch ships and they still have control and they just hire the folks that they know. And so I think that's something that we're always going to have to struggle with. And so I think that's why it's important to continue to try to get face to face with those guys, build those relationships to where they feel comfortable, getting us in the room and hiring us and giving us these high level positions to where, we have a prominent voice in front of the camera, we have a prominent seat at the table, and then be able to kind of bring more folks who think like us and look like us to make sure that our voices in the way that we see the game and the way we approach the game are being shared, just like all these other voices who have unique ways of providing information about the sports industry. And so I think that's the most important thing, just continue to get face to face with those top decision makers and just trying to continue to forge those relationships so we can be in a situation to where ultimately like we have people in those prominent roles to where we can make some serious change.
And I'm hoping that's what we can do here with the cookout. I know that in our dealings with like the Fantasy Sports Gaming Association, I mean, we've been able to leverage some of those relationships in order to get our folks up on a panel that was just at the winter conference. Hopefully, we can do some more stuff in the summer for the summer conference, and just attend some and get make our presence known at more of these events in the future. I mean, that's the goal, right? So that more folks can see, hey, there are other minorities that are being a part, not just invited to these conferences, because I mean there are executives, content managers, I mean all sorts of folks that are going to be a part of these conferences, but we're speaking at these
Yeah.
conferences, right? I mean, we're leading some of the discussions. We're being a part of these conversations with CEOs and all that. So it's not like we're just out in the crowd. I mean, we're up at the top. I mean, we're actually, guiding the discussion and guiding the conversation that should lead to more of our folks like seeing these opportunities and being able to put ourselves in that position in order to have more of us like in those positions of leadership, or seeing more of us like creating content at some of these more well-known platforms and well-known companies. I mean, that's the goal. But I'm hoping, I don't know, and I guess last question to you. I mean, do you think that so far, I mean, with the cookout, with the way things are going, I guess what would be your recommendation for things like for folks that are joining now? I mean, we've added a couple people over the last like couple of months. I mean, how like what would you say to the new people that are coming into the group, or even the people that are thinking about coming into the group? What would you say?
Uh, First and foremost, I would say since you're in the group, don't be scared to ping people that are in the group that are doing some of the things that you want to see yourself doing in the next 1, 2, 3, however many years it is, and try to get some insight that way. I would also say, like me personally, I haven't attended any of the fantasy conventions yet, but it seems like that's a great opportunity not only to meet with the folks in the cookout, but then also network with some of the other folks that are in the fantasy industry, some of the decision makers in the space, and just let them know that you're interested. Tell them about the work that you're doing. And hopefully, you can get on their radar. Um, and then other than that, I would just say it's just like trying to be successful in anything else you do. You just put your head down and you grind. You just continue to work on your content, work on your craft, share it out there. I mean, the way social media is with these algorithms and things like that, you can share some content and sometimes you'll get 1 million hits and sometimes you only get two. But if it's something that you put a lot of work into and that you're passionate about, don't be scared to click that share button and then just let your voice get out there. And I think the more that people can hear your voice on certain topics and things like that, they'll want to follow and hear more what you're about to say if they feel that you have a intelligent take that's a little bit differentiated than what they normally hear and see on social media. So I think that would be the insight that I would give to some folks that are just starting off in the business.
100%. And I think the biggest thing, and going back to my time when I first joined the industry, was it's all about the networking. I know it sounds like one of those, like, I don't know, cliche buzzwords or something like that. Like for some folks, like, I'm just go out and do my thing and like, I'll be all right. But I mean, networking isn't just some sort of thing that like older folks say just for the hell of it. I mean, even if you have one person, doesn't have to be a group. It could be just like one or two people within the cookout. If you're a minority, that's a part of the fantasy industry that you can talk to. Because if you have questions about, well, hey, this site's hitting me up. Are they a reputable site? Do they pay well? You don't want to wind up getting into a situation where you're getting underpaid, working for free. I did that for season 2, just like you did, like when you first started off. So if you want to have your time valued and value your time at the same time, I mean, having people to discuss some of the harder conversations or harder parts of joining this industry, I mean, that's what we're here for. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean that's exactly why we're doing this, is so that knowledge, I mean, that experience, I mean, good and bad, of being in the fantasy football industry. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do here at the Cookout. So hopefully, I mean, for folks listening to this, if you get a chance, I mean, hit me up, hit Tank up. I
Yeah.
mean, talk to somebody else like that's within the cookout at this point, in order to figure out, like, to ask those questions and get that stuff out. Because the only way that we get smarter is by asking or by talking to each other in order to make sure that knowledge gets spread. It's not about, putting your failures out on blast or anything like that. I mean, we celebrate the successes, and we also learn from each other's failures. So I mean, it's all about trying to bring each other up together. So hopefully that becomes a thing, like more and more over the summer and into the future as we grow a bit more. But Tank, I don't want to keep you like too much longer, man. I know that's it's the day before the draft. I'm sure Yahoo probably got something cooked up for you to do over the next weekend or something like that. But I mean, what you got cooking like over the off season, at least in the short term or over the rest of the year, to let the folks know about?
I mean, I'll probably have like some content coming out sporadically through some of the other outlets that I work with. Like I said, when I do my gig with Yahoo, pretty much after Super Bowl, since the pandemic, it pretty much ends, and then I'll maybe sign back on like in the summer, things like that. So as far as
Cool.
Yahoo is concerned, we don't have too much content coming out, but I work with some other groups like the 33rd team and things like that, where I put out some content, as the draft is going on, and then after the draft as well, and then as we get closer to the season. Start to get on some of these TV shows and do things like that to try to get the content out over the airwaves. But I would say right now, man, it's starting to get a little warm over here in California, not a lot of
Mhm.
rain. So I
Yeah.
spend my time, kind of focusing on some of the things I really don't have time to do during the regular season of football, and then spending some time with the family in the afternoons with the little man and the wife. So that's how I spend my days right now in all season, and no complaints about that.
Yeah, but I hear you, man. I'm about to head off because my son's got martial arts practice. He's got his like I think it's orange belt test tonight, if I'm
Okay.
remembering right.
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah, family over the like I said earlier, like once the Super Bowl ends, my wife almost immediately turns to me and she's like, all right, so now we're doing this, we're going here, we're
Yeah.
doing this, the kids got this going on, we got this to do this. So yeah, man, I'm with you. The off
Yeah, I keep
season
my
is
yeah, I keep my finger on the pulse, but when I have an opportunity to break, oh, I break.
Yes, like you won't find me. Yeah, like we were talking earlier. Like once I get up, once the break is here, Super Bowl, like you won't find me on social media. You'll see me either on my couch or hanging out with my boys or something like that. So I'm 100% with you. But no, man, I appreciate your time. I mean, I would love to get you back on here at some point. In order to get some more of your thoughts, like behind the scenes of what we're doing here. But for folks listening, come find us. I mean, the Cookout group or at the Cookout group, like on Twitter. Find me on Twitter, find Tank on Twitter, or whomever, in order to be a part of this group. Because if you got questions, you're a minority in this industry, you got questions about getting started, you got anything, like any issues or problems that you want to at least be able to network or talk with other folks that look like you about them, that's what we're here for. So
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, Tank, again, appreciate your time. For anyone else, I mean, let's get some more information out there. Let's have some more of these conversations. I'm sure Jorge, Marcus, Grant, I mean, some of the other folks that are part of the cookout, they'll be having some more episodes with more of our members here soon. Appreciate y'all for taking the time to listen to this, and we'll catch y'all next time.
Yeah.